Welcome back, everybody. Now that you know about photosynthesis and its molecular details, what I want to do is take a brief look at plant structure and show how that enhances photosynthesis. So plants need to solve various problems in order to promote photosynthesis. First, they need to obtain and hold on to water, and they get their water through the roots, and they keep it by limiting the amount that escapes from the inside of the plant to the outside environment. They need to obtain carbon dioxide, which is a gas in the atmosphere, and they obtain that through leaves. And they need to obtain light, and that often entails growing upward to get above other plants that are competing for the same light source. Let's take a look at roots very briefly. Water must leave the soil and cross the cell membrane to be transported to leaves. And all of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the fact that if you stick your hand down into soil, it's moist. And soil has all these marvelous ways of holding on to water against the flow of gravity, which would pull it downwards. So the roots must contact the water in the soil and bring it across their membrane. And one way they do this is by having lots of surface area. And one way that root surface area is enhanced is by the presence of these incredibly small microscopic structures called root hairs. And they just increase the surface area of the larger roots tremendously and allow the plant to pick up sufficient water. Let's talk about the path of water up through the plant. Water enters the plant through the roots, particularly the root hairs. Then it flows up through the xylem in the stem. And the xylem is what we call vascular tissues, a series of tubes that allow water to flow upwards to the leaves. And I'll show you a picture of xylem later. Water leaves the xylem in the leaf and diffuses to the two types of cells, the palisade cells and the spongy mesophyll cells, where chloroplasts are located. Water enters the chloroplast and then the thylakoid, where it takes place in the light reactions. The H from the water is taken up into the NADPH, and the oxygen is released as a waste product. And here's a general picture of it. We can see this is a generalized plant where the water comes in through the root, flows up through the vascular tissue, and then into the leaves. And then some of it actually leaves the leaves through small openings in the bottom of the leaves. Let's also look how the gases move. We'll start with carbon dioxide. It is in the atmosphere and it flows through small openings in the underside of the leaf, and then it diffuses to the cells that have chloroplasts. Similarly, the oxygen that is produced in chloroplasts diffuses outwards, and we'll take more of a look at this in a second. So the CO2 enters the plant through small openings in the leaf called stomates. We need to understand leaf anatomy, which I'll show you on the next slide, to see how this happens. The leaf is composed of several layers. There's a non-cellular waxy layer called the cuticle, then a cellular level that does not contain chloroplasts called the upper epidermis. Then these elongated cells at the upper surface filled with chloroplasts called palisade mesophyll cells. Then these irregularly shaped cells with lots of airspace between them called the spongy mesophyll cells. And then the bottom layer is the same as the top layer with an epidermis and a cuticle, except that there are these small openings, the stoma, that are surrounded by guard cells. Notice also that the vascular tissue, what we call the veins of the leaves, occur. And these include xylem, which is bringing water from the roots, and phloem, which is a type of vascular tissue we won't discuss much in this course, but also is important in the flow of material around the plant. So the gaseous component of photosynthesis, carbon dioxide, is going to diffuse in through the stoma and then get into the palisade and spongy mesophyll where the chloroplasts are. Here it is in words. Atmospheric carbon dioxide diffuses through the stomata when they are open into the space surrounding the spongy mesophyll. The CO2 diffuses into the cells containing chloroplasts. The CO2 diffuses into the stroma of the chloroplast, which is the site of the dark reactions. CO2 is fixed in the Calvin cycle by attaching to an existing carbon-based molecule. We now know that after 3 turns of the Calvin cycle, one single 3-carbon molecule G3P is produced, and 2 of these molecules will make a glucose. So that's what you should understand about how carbon dioxide goes from the atmosphere into organic molecules in the plant. The oxygen is produced inside the thylakoid. So it must diffuse into the stroma, then into the cytoplasm, and then into the airspace within the leaf, and then diffuse into the atmosphere through the stomata. Some of the oxygen, however, will be used for cellular respiration. Now that we know all this, we can answer a few questions by realizing that leaves are an adaptation to enhance photosynthesis. So, for example, why are leaves flat? See if you can come up with an answer. Well, it maximizes the surface area for the collection of light and minimizes the distance that CO2 has to diffuse to get to chloroplasts. Where are most chloroplasts located? Well, think about that for a second, see if you can get an answer. They're located mostly on the upper surface of the leaf and less so towards the middle and lower surfaces of the leaf because that's where the highest light intensity occurs. How is gas movement facilitated by the structure of the leaf? Think about that answer for a second. Well, you're right, the spongy mesophyll is widely separated by open space to allow the diffusion of gas to the underside of the palisade mesophyll cells as well as to the spongy mesophyll cells. What are the trade-offs with gas exchange? Think about what's the problem with having these little openings on the underside of the leaf? You probably figured it out. Gas exchange also allows water vapor to escape, and this can cause the plant to have water problems during very hot days. It turns out, however, that it's necessary for water to escape in order for the xylem to function effectively. Xylem can't transport water from the roots to the shoots, to the leaves, unless there's evaporation out of the leaf. And how do leaves minimize water loss? There's another question. You can probably think about the anatomy of a leaf. Yeah, if you figured out that the stomates occur on the underside of the leaf, which is away from sunlight, which minimizes evaporation out of them, and also that they have guard cells that can open and close, which we'll talk about in a second, and also, which I didn't write here, that there is a waxy cuticle on the upper and lower surface that prevents evaporation of water or escape of water from between cells. At this point, I just want to talk to you a little bit about the language that I've been using. What's up with stomata and stomates? The openings on the underside of leaves have 2 names. The singular is stoma and the plural is stomata. But you can also use stomate or stomates. You can feel free to choose your language or mix and match. I don't really care. Let's look at the stomata, and here you can see a micrograph of the stomata on the underside of a leaf. And check this out. There's an opening, and then there are these cells called the guard cells, and they can open and allow gas exchange and the loss of water vapor, or they can close and prevent that from happening. And so here's what happens. When water is plentiful, the stomates stay open because they absorb a lot of water, and in their turgid or rigid position, they are banana-shaped. But when they lose water because water is scarce, they are no longer turgid and they fold together and close and prevent the evaporation of water. And here's a nice electron micrograph which shows you that some are closed and some are open. One other thing I want to say about gas exchange is the high humidity inside the leaf means that water will escape by diffusion. And the fact that carbon dioxide is fixed inside the chloroplast means that carbon dioxide will always flow by diffusion. But what do you suppose happens to photosynthesis on really hot days when water becomes scarce and the stomates close, the guard cells close the openings? What do you suppose happens as CO2 can no longer flow into the leaf? Think about that. Let me know in class what you think the answer is. Finally, I want to take a quick look at the plant vascular system. And these are basically tubes that run from the roots to the shoots, from the ground all the way up to where the leaves are. And they literally look like little tubes. And here you can see that we have xylem tubes, which are carrying water upwards, and we have phloem tubes, which generally carry materials and water downward. The way we can remember this is to talk about xi high and flow low. Xylem takes things up and phloem takes things down. Now it turns out in the spring when trees are just leafing out, the phloem briefly flows upward for a while, transporting materials, particularly nutrients and sugar, to the growing leaves. So how does water get from the roots to the shoots? Against the force of gravity, because gravity is tending to hold it down. And the answer to this is the cohesion tension hypothesis. And it's based on our old friends hydrogen bonds and the fact that water readily forms hydrogen bonds with itself and with other polar molecules. And if you don't remember what a polar molecule is, you should stop the video and look that up right now. So water adheres by hydrogen bonding to the sides of the xylem, and that accounts for some of the rise. So in other words, the water has an attraction to the chemical compounds in the sides of the xylem that accounts for some of the rise. Water also coheres to itself. In other words, hydrogen bonds form between water to make them stick together. And so they cohere in the xylem. When water evaporates at the top of the xylem, it exerts a small upward tug on the previous molecule, which exerts a small upward tug on the ones behind it. And this force is translated all the way down the xylem to slowly bring them up. Then they don't fall backwards because of their adhesion to the sides of the xylem. The evaporation of water through the stomata is referred to as the process of transpiration. About 1% of the water that flows up in the xylem is used for photosynthesis. The rest is transpired. And transpiration is very important in the global water cycle because it is often significant in saturating the air and causing rain to fall. And here's a picture of the cohesion tension hypothesis, and I'll let you look at that on your own time. But here are the water molecules flowing in through the roots, traveling up through the xylem, and here you can see the adhesion and cohesion ideas, and then flowing out through the stoma. So that's it for today. I hope that you have a good understanding now of how the structure of plants is designed, meaning selected for, over evolutionary time to promote the aspects of photosynthesis. Remember, the reactants in photosynthesis are water and carbon dioxide. And so plants have very specific systems for obtaining water through their roots and allowing carbon dioxide to diffuse through their leaves to chloroplasts, which are the site of photosynthesis. You have a lot to take in today. I would suggest you study for a few minutes longer and then go outside, look at nature, ask biological questions, bring them back to us at class, and I'll see you soon.